Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today we are here to talk about some of the biggest mobile workforce transformation trends in 2018. So we're taking a sneak peek into what you can expect to be dealing with over the next year. I'm Sarah Nicastro, Editor-in-Chief of Field Technologies, and I'll be moderating today's event. We are at a very exciting time of change and innovation in the field service space. But that can also be overwhelming for companies at times, trying to sort through what is most relevant for them, what they need to be doing, how to prioritize their initiatives. So there's a lot going on, and that's a good thing, but it can also be a challenging thing. So today, Sumair Dutta, Chief Customer Officer at the Service Council, is going to walk you through what some of the biggest challenges are in the field service space, some of the top initiatives of different field service organizations, how technology is playing a role in all of this, and help you sort through how you compare to your peers and what some of the things are that you need to be thinking about. So you'll want to make sure you have your pen and paper ready, because this is going to be some great information to take notes on as you're gearing up to set your goals and objectives for next year. Today's webinar is sponsored by Astea, and Emily Hackman, Director of Global Marketing at Astea, is joining us. She's going to set the stage for you before Sumair begins. We will be taking your questions after today's presentation, so feel free to ask them as we go along. We'll get to as many as possible during the Q&A. Any we don't have time for, we will certainly follow up on after the event. So with that said, I'm going to hand it over to Emily to get us started. Emily?
Thank you, Sarah. And thank you all for joining us today to learn about mobility trends for 2018. Sumair has a lot of great data and insight to share with you, so I will keep my introduction brief. For those who are not familiar with Astea International, we are a leading global provider of end-to-end service management solutions. What makes us unique is that we cover the full spectrum of service lifecycle management, including customer management, depot repair, service management, asset and warranty management, forward and reverse logistics management, and mobile workforce management and optimization, which of course is why we're here today. Our platform, Astea Alliance, is essentially an ERP platform designed specifically for service organizations. We have been experts in field service technology for nearly 40 years, and we have offices, clients, and partners around the globe. Our customers include the world's biggest, most complex service companies with departments, customers, and partners often spanning multiple continents. We help our customers focus everyone in the organization on positive service outcomes, and that's why we have one of the highest customer retention rates out of all vendors in this space. We don't develop technology for technology's sake. Our focus is more on solving business needs like mobile worker empowerment. That's why we were named a Customer Value Leader in Mobile Workforce Management by Frost & Sullivan. From a product point of view, we strive to provide powerful features that are easy for your frontline workers to use. Our goal is to make it easier for your field technicians to do their job. With that, I will turn it over to Sumair.
Well, thank you, Emily, and Sarah and the team. Thank you for having me. Emily and your team at Astea, thank you for allowing me to share some insights and knowledge of what I think and what our organization, the Service Council, thinks about 2018. It's always an interesting time to start predicting 1 year out. We typically try not to make too many predictions 3 to 5 years out, because those are very, very difficult to predict. And I don't know who actually goes back to check and see if 5-year predictions actually come true. And I think quite often these 5-year predictions can be very, very ambiguous. Now, I don't want to say that you shouldn't be planning and thinking about making 5-year roadmaps of thoughts, especially when it comes to technology and workforce plans. I just think predictions around technology trends are so difficult to make now, given all of the changes in technology, given all of the new developments in technology, that I'm very pleased to have to talk about the next 12 months and what I see happening in field service management and sort of mobile workforce management as well. So thank you all for everyone joining in, listening live or on demand. I really appreciate the opportunity to share some of our research and findings and opinions. My role at the Service Council as the Chief Customer Officer is essentially to work on the content and research that we create and also to use research as a vehicle to develop a larger community of service executives who are not only connected to us with our research, but connected to each other. And they do so on forums like this one. They do so at events. We host a series of events. There are many others in the industry who host events. Essentially, our goal and my goal is to bring folks together to learn from each other. There is so much knowledge built into your own organizations, but also within other organizations in the service industry, that there's a great opportunity to learn from each other. And we hope to provide one set of resources to do that as a Service Council. There are many other organizations that do so as well. Field Technologies is another great platform. So I'm really, really happy that we're providing the opportunity for service executives to get together in a combined fashion here today. So I did my little spiel about the Service Council. I'll introduce some of the companies we work with. I'll do a little bit of a review of 2017. And if I were to leave you with a couple of takeaways today, I want you to understand some of the themes and the trends that we see. And some of these, or most of those, are continuation of themes and trends that you probably felt as service leaders, business leaders, technology leaders, that you felt in 2017, probably in 2016 and in 2015. A lot of the things that are happening aren't necessarily net new. Now, in some instances, there are new terms being applied to all technologies. In some instances, there are new technologies that are on the horizon that we need to think about and consider and how they impact not only our investment profiles, but the way we do work. But I really want to bring everything back to this general concept of mobile worker empowerment. Essentially, all of the technology in the world is great, and all of the new solutions and systems that are out there are wonderful and will have and can have a significant impact on the way that you do work. At least for the foreseeable future and into 2018, as much as I'm hedging my bets here, most of field service work, a lot of field service work at the point of delivery will continue to be delivered by people, by persons, by human beings, with the aid of technology, whether that technology is mobility or IoT or knowledge management or artificial intelligence or augmented reality. All of those are enabling technology. At the end of the day, mobile workforce empowerment starts with the people and understanding what it is that people need to do their jobs better. And so if you were to think about one takeaway, if you were to leave the webinar now, the one takeaway I would leave you is to understand from your front lines what it is that comes in the way of them doing their jobs. And the opposite side of that question would be, what is it that they like to be doing on their jobs, and how can you enable them to be spending more time doing those things? And all of the technology decisions that you make essentially would fall into the answers to those questions. So I would urge you as service leaders to begin to talk to your front lines if you haven't done so already, and begin to understand the multi-generational workforces. What are some of the themes and trends that you need to think about to enable them to do their work better? I'll give you some answers of things that we've seen, questions that we've asked in similar fashion from an aggregate point of view. But I'd encourage you to ask those questions to your employees, to your teams, and to others that you are aware of who might be working directly with frontline employees. So my presentation is broken into 2017 because I think some of the themes and trends that we see in 2017, I'm fairly confident that they will continue into 2018. We'll break down some of the changes, and when you start thinking about predictions, quite often we think about just technology. But we're going to break some of our predictions and thoughts around people, process, data, and then we'll spend some time around technology and technology themes and trends for 2018 as well. And I'm hopeful that we're able to cover and provide you with enough insight on a couple of takeaways and a couple of frameworks to begin to think about as you navigate your investment plans for 2018. As we mentioned, the Service Council is essentially the opportunity as an organization for service leaders to get together to share insight and information and knowledge. We provide that opportunity through the aid of research. Everything you see is survey-driven. Opinion is obviously has its place, but most of the facts that you see is what other companies are doing around specific areas. I, of course, add my thoughts on top of that. These are a sample of some of the companies that we work with. As you can see in the middle there, the Chicago Cubs no longer the World Series champions. So for those of you in Houston, congratulations. But we work with a wide array of companies across multiple industries because we do believe that uncommon industries not only share common pain points, but quite often enact common strategies to tackle their pain points. And that's really important because what you are doing or thinking about, it's likely that someone else has probably faced that similar challenge, and there is so much opportunity in knowledge of the overall community. I do have a lot of slides, so I should get going. As we think about 2017, and a lot of these, I believe, are themes and trends that will continue into 2018. But if we think about 2017 in a couple of lenses, one is what were the major challenges that field service leaders in our community were facing? And you can see that they not only faced internal challenges tied to things like the aging workforce, or the needs to continue to drive a greater level of efficiency. As you can see, 37% of respondents talked about that. We also saw external trends and themes, and you'll see this consistently in my presentation, is this concept of desire for an improved customer experience, even in service, even in business-to-business situations. There is sometimes a mindset to say, well, customer experience, that's much more of a very consumer-driven concept. And I'd like to argue that we've heard things like bring your own device and bring your own experience. I'd like to argue that the experiences that we receive as consumers, we quite often take those expectations with us in our enterprise relationships as well. And so if someone like an Amazon can give me a certain type of experience, why isn't there enough technology for my enterprise service provider to help me in my work life as well? Now, some of you might think about experience differently, and I'd argue that you should be thinking about what it is that your customer is receiving. Was it aligned with the expectations that you set? And were you using experience as a way to differentiate yourself from your competition? Because I would guarantee that your competition probably has the same capabilities around getting people on time, providing the right parts, or some of those different things. So you're going to have to think about differentiating buyer experience. Now, the other element of customer demand is to think about your customer in multiple layers. You're not just working with the person who's operating the equipment or the product that you've sold to. They report up to a manager or a buyer of some forms, and they technically might report to a CFO or a CIO. And each one of your customers has different needs. And a lot of the leading companies that we work with are beginning to understand the priorities of decision makers when it comes to service. The person signing off on the service contract might have different priorities versus the person who's impacted by performance on that service contract. And it's very important to think about all of those as you think about the investments that you make in improving customer experience. I'll share a little bit more around aging workforce. I have a couple more slides here. I want to talk about, of course, the final two themes here, talk about technology, is once again getting a better picture of your service business through the integration of data and information with back-end enterprise systems, and then navigating emerging technology trends. There isn't a day or an hour or a minute that we don't get hit on the head by some commentary on how AR, AI, augmented reality, artificial intelligence is going to change the way we do work. There's many, many articles on the future of work, and it does get very, very confusing at times, and navigating through that mess and prioritizing those technologies becomes quite a challenge, and as you can see, has been a challenge for some time. So the initiatives that companies are working to address those challenges, and a lot of these will work into 2018, will be the desire to understand what does the ideal experience look like in interacting with field service, and how can you take steps to improve that, whether that's with the aid of technology, with the aid of people, with the aid of change in process, with the aid of a change in the way you measure performance. And that's one of the other major takeaways is you can't just look at field service performance through the old metrics of just productivity or even thinking about utilization. You need to start thinking about productivity and utilization as one sort of set in a balanced scorecard that includes some of the commercial metrics, that includes some of the experience metrics, that includes some of the customer-focused metrics around loyalty and retention, and I would argue ease of doing business. You have to think about performance in all of those constructs as opposed to just the productivity or the brute productivity numbers that have typically been central to field service. Becoming more predictive as a business, so improving the predictability in terms of better forecasting, but also more predictive outcomes for your customers, so making sense of all of the data that you have. And I'd argue that a lot of companies have assimilated all of the data that they need, and now it's in enacting the actual service workflows associated with that data. And those workflows are tied to field service, but they also could be tied to the contact center. Workforce, we'll go into that, and then the commercial growth of field service and performance management. Now, most of you, I would argue, probably have a revenue objective for your field service business. In some instances, this is something where you've established a goal around revenue. In some instances, you might not have an actual goal. But as we've talked about the whole profit-centric vision of service, there is more and more responsibility on field service to either directly impact revenue through things like lead generation or actual direct sales, or indirect revenue, again, primarily through lead generation, and providing customers with the opportunity to interact with your customer, with the organization more. And here's where the concept of customer success, which is something that's typically been very software-centric, becomes relevant. But there are revenue objectives on field service, and there are more and more companies not only thinking about the field service arm as the source of that revenue, but the entire service business, whether it's contracts, parts, additional services, consulting, education, training, those areas that might be valuable for customers in terms of driving a greater level of value and, of course, a greater level of attachment with the service provider. So before we think about technology trends, I want to talk about some of the trends that I see really becoming quite relevant as it applies to people, process, data, and technology. Now, the people realm for me is one that will really come to the forefront not only in 2018, but in the next 3 to 5 years. And this becomes relevant as companies think about their future automation plan. But it also goes back to the idea that I said, in the near term, most of field service is delivered through people, through an actual workforce. And we don't see this changing in the near term. So what is it that you can do to empower people? One involves putting the right people in place. And then the second involves making sure you give those folks the tools that are needed to get the job done. And getting the job done, again, could be getting it done effectively, getting it done efficiently, and delivering the right experience that you might need. So when we talk to companies around 2017 in terms of the major focus areas around workforce and talent, you can see in those areas, which are typically HR-centric areas, we see a big focus on onboarding and training. And training is in all of the conversations that we have, we really see a greater impetus and focus on training overall from a content point of view. So in terms of initial learning, so when someone is brought into the organization, in terms of ongoing and continuous learning, which is they've been in the organization, we're providing them with skills not only to improve their performance on the job, but to improve them personally, so things that your employees would like to learn about. And then I'd say there's a third piece of training which typically or traditionally would fall under knowledge management, but I would say that these are performance support tools. So these are the things where on the job or prior to the job or right after the completion of the job, tools and information and technologies that can enable, in this instance, field service workers get their work done or get to the finish line, if you will. And traditionally, knowledge and training these have been separate silos. You've had your initial learning, you've had your ongoing learning, and then you've had your knowledge support or your performance support. Now we begin to see service and HR begin to work together to really break down the silos between those three buckets. So an employee goes through a continuum of knowledge, and that starts at when they are onboarded, but also continues throughout their journey. And there's a big, big focus on breaking those silos and bringing those three areas together. Finding the right talent with the aging workforce challenge that we've seen in field service, and I have a couple more statistics around that. Finding new sources of talent potentially, and this could be either different groups, so you can think about whether it's veterans or people in different industries or partnering with academia and academic institutions or other areas to bring new sources of talent. We see, of course, that as a major focus. But it also brings the concept of a blended workforce into play. And what that means is that your service workforce might not just be your own W-2 or your own employees. You might have multiple layers of workers. You might have your own employees for certain tasks. You might have an extended workforce, which is third-party partners for another set of tasks. And then you might even have what would typically be called freelancers or the crowd for other tasks. And determining what work is best suited for which workforce is an area that I definitely believe there will be a lot more investment in 2018 by field service organizations. The final thing on this slide that I'd like to talk about is employee engagement. We definitely see a greater push from very, very traditional service companies that have done some level of employee surveying, perhaps a semi-annual or annual survey, to more of a programmatic approach towards employee engagement. And engagement is to ensure that there's alignment with the vision of the company. And of course, the aim not only is to reduce churn, but to drive productivity and drive alignment and to drive basically championing the organization and bring in new talent. We see more and more companies spend more time on employee engagement and actually have dedicated programs, but it still is in its infancy. And I would suggest that you should work with, if you're a service leader, work with your human capital leaders to think about an engagement program for your employees in field service. And it starts with listening, some sort of programmatic listening, but actual actions tied to that listening become quite relevant as well. So we mentioned some of the things around training, the major themes and trends that we see occurring in training over the next 3 years. And again, these are the timelines that we're happy to make predictions around. The use of on-demand content. We've worked with a number of companies, and I would say almost every company that we work with is thinking about the use of, given that pretty much all the employees have some form of mobile device, giving them the ability to access training material in an on-demand and potentially video fashion, video medium. And what does that entail? Of course, requires the creation of content, the ability to people to access that content, user controls depending on who's accessing the content, whether it's your employees, third-party employees. But this is sort of a major focus area. And some companies are making videos, of course, through a centralized training mechanism. Other companies are distributing that out to their workforces. They actually have their own field workers in this instance develop videos of how they are resolving a particular situation, and then putting that back into some sort of central repository for others to access. And you, of course, need to have someone who's managing the content, the use of the content, the updating of that content as well. But we really see user-driven content becoming quite significant here. And it's not just for repair procedures, and quite often we just limit ourselves to repair. But we're talking about the use of a lot of new technology here in field service. And for a lot of companies with perhaps a more experienced workforce who's not as prepared for the use of some new technology, the ability to do basic things on a smartphone, the ability to file an expense report, the ability to access some sort of information, training videos that help make their lives easier, not only at the point of support, are very, very well received, especially when they come from other field service technicians. The desire to become more customer-centric. Now, some of your organizations might have customer service training, customer skills training brought in to make sure that your field service technicians are no longer just there to fix the problem, but they're there to fix the customer or help the customer. And provide them with guidance and insight. I think this is definitely a path that we see. We see this not only in training, we see this in net new hiring as well, the desire of focus on customer centricity and those sort of skills from an assessment point of view. And then the last thing I talk about is performance data. So not just going down the path of saying, well, we're going to have an engagement program or we're going to develop training modules just because everyone needs training. So thinking about personalizing training a little bit based on the performance of that particular technician, or based on that need, based on the needs of those technicians. This could also line up with things like career path. Not every technician should have just a singular career path as they go from technician to manager to work out of the organization potentially. But deploying multiple career paths. If someone wants to become a specialist in a certain area, they want to go start working in training, you don't have to go down the same career path, but using performance to identify which those areas might be that they might be interested in, or from a performance point of view, which areas do they need support from a training and knowledge perspective. It's difficult to go into a workforce discussion without acknowledging the aging workforce issue, which impacts a lot of the technology decisions that are being made. Aging workforce is not just about we somehow need to keep the knowledge of the people that are leaving and then transfer it to the net new group of employees that we have. I think that's one of the major components and challenges of the entire aging workforce issue. But there are other things to think about. What does the workforce of the future look like? Not just from an automation and people point of view, but from who your partners are when you deliver service and support. What type of empowerment are you going to begin to provide customers in some of the self-service capacity? So what does your service portfolio look like? And I would suggest and argue that with the aging workforce and certain workforce leaving your organization, the opportunity is now to consider what your service portfolio would look like and the ways and means in which you want to deliver service and support are structured in the future. And so what that means is, is there an option around self-service for your customers? Is there an option for remote support with your customers? Is there an option for technical support where there's no dispatch that you can offer your customers? And then, of course, what is the field service option, experience, pricing? What does that look like? And these multiple layers of support, I think, will become very, very relevant because those might also impact who is delivering that service and support. So in the next 5 to 10 years, we expect most of the companies to make some sort of decision around their service portfolio. As you can see, 70% here are impacted by an aging workforce. The steps that most companies are taking to sort of solve that aging workforce crisis and to get sort of a little bit around that is in improving sort of some of the technology investments around knowledge, but also investing in mentorship and career path programs, one, to keep some of those aging workers back into the system and keep their knowledge in the system so that they can go and train new workers, but also that they can provide performance support to those who are out in the field and where the net new workers perhaps aren't trained on all of the service tasks that they need to be working on. They actually train on just a handful of tasks, and then they can get live assistance and support moving forward. So I've talked about some of the things around training. I've talked about some of the things around aging. And the last thing I'd like to share around the people side is this concept of third parties and contractors. And some people call this contingent labor, freelance labor, whatever it might be. I would say it really points to the idea and the concept of a blended workforce. And we see, of course, moving forward within the next 3 to 5 years, more and more organizations will increase their reliance for service work on third-party organizations, on regional providers, and, of course, independent contractors. Now, we have companies that we work with that outsource 100% of their field service work. They don't do it. Someone else does it for them. You think about dealers, distributors, all of that. But we also have companies that do a fairly large chunk of service on their own. And within those companies, for most of them, about 3/4 of them use some sort of third parties for the delivery of service. Now, typically, this has been done in a more, we don't serve this region, so we're going to have someone support that. Or we have the need for additional capacity in the future around high volume areas, so we're going to partner with someone around that. Or it might just be that we don't do a certain type of work, and so our partner is going to be this. I think what it begins to come down to is companies understanding the portfolio of service work, matching that with the portfolio of their customers, and determining which areas are they the best fit in terms of from a competitive advantage, from a customer relationship point of view, and using your own employees to do that service work, whereas everything else that is maybe primarily more transactional will be supported by a partner, whether that's a third party or whether that's a network of contractors. But this is definitely something, and this is, again, giving the aging workforce an opportunities for companies to think about, not only from a workforce point of view, but from a skill set, from a service portfolio, and an automation point of view. So we've talked about some of the themes and trends from a people point of view. When we think about process, and as it applies to the field service realm or field service technician, I'd like to take this from the perspective, and there's many processes that we can go into, predictive service processes, service delivery processes, service learning processes. I'd like to take the perspective of the overall process of delivering field service. Now, we've entertained the concept of the perfect field service visit. Now, there are other industries where there is a metric, and typically a compound metric, tied to, in warehousing, the perfect pick. In supply chain, there's the perfect order rate, which also sometimes applies to manufacturing. And typically, it is a compound metric where it means it's a multiplication of multiple metrics or different metrics as well. So we asked companies in a recent project, actually a 2016 project, around how would they define the perfect field service visit. And for a lot of the companies, the perfect visit was, a first-time fix. We need to make sure that when the technician arrives, that they actually fix the problem in the first-time visit. For other companies, there was, a couple of added nuances. There's some companies said, well, we wanted to be the first-time fix, but they also wanted the uncovering of a revenue opportunity potentially. Others talked about the experience delivered. So the first-time fix was relevant, but did we arrive on time? Did we meet the expectation around arrival? And did we deliver the experience that the customer needed from even a post-event point of view? Did we provide accurate billing? Did we provide accurate information? Did we invoice appropriately? Did we capture feedback? Did we make sure that not only that specific problem was resolved, but we addressed potential other problems as well? Did we advise customers on the use of their product? And so the perfection metric took on multiple flavors. Level 1 was, let's make sure we were effective. Level 2 is, let's make sure that we were effective and potentially found new revenue opportunities. And level 3 was, let's make sure that we delivered the right experience. And so we asked the question is, what percentage of your field visits are perfect? And most companies said, well, probably about 60 to 70%. And then how can you improve the level of perfection? And this was what was provided back. So what you're looking at here is, the improvement in providing or achieving that perfect metric. One was providing better information on mobile devices, so empowering our field workforce with mobility. More intelligent scheduling and dispatch, so making sure that when we scheduled someone, that they were the right person for the job, but also that they arrived within the window that the customer wanted them to arrive in. So sort of appointment windows that were appropriate for the customer needs. Of course, better training, and then enhanced triage, which if you think about first-time fix, better triage is the number one action that people say in terms of improving that first-time fix is when we get that service request and we make sure we triage it appropriately so that we're not just sending someone out there to meet a particular deadline, but actually sending the right person because that has cost and customer service ramifications. So the other way to think about that is, okay, as an organization, we want to think about this is the way that we want to achieve perfection. But if we start thinking about how do we then translate that into improving a day in the life of our field service employees, what are some of the things that we can do at the point of service? And these are some of the things that folks said were top of mind. So taking away things that come in the way of getting work done, removing administrative paperwork and moving to mobile. And I want to talk a little bit more about mobile. I'm not a big proponent right now just to say, well, you just go and invest in mobile technology and it'll solve all of your problems. I think mobile is a channel to enable workers, but it can also be deployed poorly, leading to frustration, challenges, and actually the inverse of what you were hoping to accomplish with the aid of mobile tools. Building a plan to capture and share knowledge, and then providing better access to information in the field, whether that's customer records and history, or providing issue resolution information to your technicians in the field. And so this is where we start thinking about mobile workforce empowerment, right? We're not only giving them the technology to be able to fill in a form or move on and look at a service ticket, but we're actually giving them the ideas and the tools to make sure that they can get the work that they need to do and get the information that they need, but are not burdened by the technology. So there's a concept out there called calm technology, which talks about how we're really beginning to burden ourselves more and more with technology. whereas the really most effective technology operates in the background and provides assistance when we need it. And this is where a lot of technologies, mobile, IoT, augmented reality, artificial intelligence, they need to be built into the process of when and if our service worker needs assistance, while automating some of the mundane tasks that they are not big fans of or takes a lot of time for them to do. And we haven't really cracked the nut yet. A lot of companies are getting a lot better at this, but they're still considered very, very disparate technologies, and sometimes that comes in the way of getting work done. So improving a day in the life from an organization's point of view quite often aligns with what we see directly from technicians. Several of you probably participated in this project that we conducted last year where we asked folks about, we asked companies to provide us with access to their field service technicians, and we did a study of about 150 field service technicians across the globe. And we asked them very standard, simple questions about their work and how they got into the profession, but we also asked them what I thought were the two most pertinent questions was, what is the least favorite part of your day-to-day work, and then what is the best part of your day-to-day? And the least favorite part, of course, if you poll directly with the technicians, is really the time it takes to complete paperwork and other administrative tasks. And in some industries or in some regulatory frameworks, you can't get away from this, but this is the big challenge that comes in the way of getting work done. And then the one that's second is really more telling, which is the time spent looking for information. And with a lot of companies that we've talked to have made the investments in mobility, so all of our technicians have mobile devices. And there's been this big push towards productivity with the aid of mobility, but why are they still struggling to look for information? And I have something that we'll talk about here in a few slides when we talk about mobility, but this is where I think about, as you start thinking about IoT and other technologies, I think it's important to think about mobility in the concept of what is the information that we're providing to the technicians, what is the form in which we provide that information, and in what context are we providing that information? Is it something that we're actually using to really burden them, or is it something that we're actually providing them that is of assistance? And so this becomes really, really relevant in terms of mobile workforce empowerment and really understanding what is it that we need to solve for these technicians, as opposed to just giving them another way to record a procedure or record something. There's a lot that can be accomplished. And it is worth mentioning what is the best part of their day. A lot of it is tied to solving customer problems, being in front of customers, getting work done. And this is where it is very, very important to think about where mobility can support them as well. There is something in field service, and this is where technology can come into play as well. Field service is an inherently lonely job, and so we start thinking about the safety and the engagement aspects, or not just physical safety, but mental safety and all of those different aspects. Technology can play a very, very vital role in connecting people with each other, whether it's for point of service support or other collaboration and communication. And that sometimes is an underserved value of mobility that doesn't get mentioned because we're all focused on just productivity. But that's something as well that's worth mentioning. Now, the final slide here is around what are the things that technicians directly say that they would like access to on mobile. And you can see it goes back to that thing of looking for information to get work done. We wish we had better access to things like a knowledge base with service procedures that are probably interactive. We wish we had better access to service manuals in a mobile format so that we don't have to carry these big, thick manuals around all the time. And then we wish we had better access to things like, the visit, the review of that asset or that customer that we're working with, so that we come in and we sound and look professional and we're able to solve their problems, especially in an instance where you're not attached to that specific customer. I want to quickly just spend some time on data and then go into some of the technology tools as I enter sort of the last couple of minutes here, the last 5 to 10 minutes of my presentation. There's a big talk about data. Everyone has data. We have so much data that we don't know what to do with it. We've all got to be predictive. We've all got to be buying predictive analytics. And those are all great intentions. And I think there's really the biggest thing to come out of this is who needs the data within your organization, who is working on preparing that data, and what action are you looking to drive from that data? Because I think where most companies get stuck is in this mountain of data that they're looking at, they're not able to really make sense of what is it that they would like to accomplish. If you're looking to drive better self-service outcomes for your customers, then you need to think about what data is needed, and what sort of activities you're looking to drive from that data now. If you're looking to become more predictive in terms of the service you deliver, what is the information that you need? And I think quite often that those steps are missed in terms of what is better data. And you can see most companies think about, we need more accuracy in the data, we need it available in a timely way, and we need to identify a path forward. As you can see, the companies that we would consider to be sort of best in class, or we call them the champions, they have resources in place to manage data, but that's not even 100%. Even the top performing companies from a margin, from a customer satisfaction point of view, only 75% have actually put data analysts, or actual people in place to manage performance data and develop business outcomes from that. 50% are looking at things like business intelligence and analytics to support those analysts, and only 27% talk about having actual predictive analytics in place. So while we are sometimes led to believe that everyone is predictive and using these great tools to have predictive outcomes, we're still in the very, very early stages. Now, it is important to think about how these tools might enable you to become more predictive at service. Becoming more predictive is definitely something that you need to consider, but these tools are still in their early stages of use. And so I wouldn't be completely scared of saying we don't have predictive analytics. Not a lot of companies are using it as of yet. They're thinking about the predictive outcomes that they would like to drive, and then the tools that will help them drive those outcomes, which is typically where you start with a person as an analyst, and then you begin to put some of these tools in place. Some of the things in the dark blue bars that champions are doing with data, better allocation of labor, better forecasting and planning. So whether it's from a parts point of view or a work point of view, we see a lot more maturity around that. And then some things around connecting and communicating with customers. So being able to access the performance of products and then proactively communicating with customers around how they can get better value with that. These are some of the use cases of data that we see companies, especially the top performers or the champions, spending a lot more time on than those who aren't as mature in terms of their usage of data. So we talked a lot of people. We talked about process. We talked about data. I'd like to spend a little bit of time on technology and some of the concepts and themes that we're beginning to see emerge around some of the new trends. When we look forward, it's always good to look back a little bit. How much has people invested in service automation over the last 5 years? You can see the number of projects. Most companies fall in that 1 to 3 major service automation projects bucket. 12% say that they've had more than 7 projects. I don't necessarily feel bad for those teams, but that's a lot of technology to try to integrate and change companies around. But we see a very active sort of life cycle of technology within service. The focus of the automation has been around primarily the back-end customer service and support and field service execution, which makes sense because those are the areas we see companies beginning to shore up. We expect moving forward, of course, customer experience will be a major focus. Now, I'd say the objectives have typically always been, as you build a business case for technology, to improve productivity and decrease cost. It is difficult to consider customer satisfaction as a way to improve the investment in technology, because it's very difficult to measure or align that the specific technology led to an increase in customer satisfaction. Now, with some of the newer tools, you're going to be able to look at more and more metrics in terms of their direct impact on metrics. And once again, I would go back to the basic argument that it's not just about productivity or cost saving, but field service business should be measured on effectiveness and efficiency, but also things like the experience that they deliver, the customer impact that they have, and then eventually some of the commercial opportunities that are driven by that business. This is more of a philosophical side in terms of thinking about technology, and has it made you more money, and have you been able to establish that line of sight? And you can see companies say that for the most part, technology investments have made them more productive, more efficient. But it's about 50-50, if you will, on those who say that the technology has directly led to more profitability. And some of this ties to, it's very difficult to align technology with revenue. So while there have been cost savings, that might have been balanced out with the cost increase somewhere else. But we see more and more companies begin to think about this, of course, as they make future decisions about technology. Now, we continue to see fairly bullish intentions around technology purchases moving forward. For the next year, companies they expect that they will keep the same level of budget, but it will, compared to, well, this is looking back, so compared to last year, technology budgets have stayed constant. Then compared to 5 years ago, almost 50% of companies talk about there being an increase. And then when you start looking into the future, companies expect for the most part that they will trend up in terms of their technology budgets, especially as we get hit by some of these new technologies that everyone's talking about. And then this is the focus of these solutions, mostly around customer support and customer experience. Now, here's the second philosophical slide. What will technology do in the future to the role of people? And you could see some companies are honest about that we will not be rehiring for certain roles because of our investment in technology. But in the near term, we don't see people being displaced significantly with field service tools. We do see that there is a need to create new roles, new thoughts around people who are going to be managing the solution and also managing the data as well. Now, I'll quickly talk about 4 technology areas that all of you will probably have top of mind. Yes, I will talk about mobility because while we are in this realm of thinking about AI and AR, I still think mobility for the next 12 months is the most transformative technology in field service, not because of the actual devices, but actually because of the information that's available on the devices. What you can't see on the screen there properly is that 78% of companies that we talk to say that they're actually mobile in terms of their workforces having mobile devices, but they still have, the problem, what I would call of this, we've given workers the devices and now we expect them to work differently. You haven't really given them the actual tools and the information that they need. And so there's a little bit of a paradox where we've invested more and more in this technology, but we haven't really seen the big gains in productivity that we would expect. And I think this image does a really good job of talking about it. It's asking for backup, you're calling someone on the phone, whereas they could have been given that information prior to the service visit on the mobile platform. So I do think mobility, we're in that wave of where mobility has driven sort of the initial benefits that we were able to see on the back end. But we have yet to see the real frontline productivity improvements as a result of mobility because we haven't addressed those core questions that field service technicians have regarding the removal of paperwork, regarding the assistance at the point of support, regarding the information that they need to resolve customer situations. Now, we do see, companies that make investments in mobility, they start off with the intent of less paperwork and increased productivity. But once they get 3 years of mobility under their belt, then they start thinking about the results of mobility to improve first-time fix and increase revenue. I would argue that if you are making an investment in mobility or are thinking about mobility, put those on your initial roadmap. Those shouldn't be something that you're only looking to do 3 years down the road. If you empower the technicians with information right away, then you're able to get them bought into mobility a lot faster than if you were just pushing efficiencies on the back end. And I do think there's an opportunity to drive more efficiency on the front end around mobility. IoT is something that everyone's talked about. You should all be connected. If you aren't, the jury's out on that. And most companies we work with are going to be connected for net new products that they have. In terms of backfilling or retrofitting, really we don't see a lot of companies seeing the cost justification for that. Depending on the industry, in some heavier industries there is justification. And you can see it used to be that we need to eliminate dispatches when we go into our IoT project. It then becomes a medium to become more predictive. To collecting data from a singular asset, collecting data from an ecosystem of assets, and then being able to come up with predictive outcomes, not only for that specific asset, but for the entire ecosystem, is becoming the big push around IoT. And then we will always continue to deal with security concepts and issues, and no one has really solved this. There are many different approaches to security from a number of the IoT platform companies or solution providers, and there's a really good focus and discussion around security. But we're always one data breach away from taking a step back. And that data breach doesn't need to happen in the industrial setting. It can happen in a very consumer setting, as the example of what happened at Target several years ago and then Equifax this year and all of those things. And this is just very, very pertinent, important discussion. As an individual, as an organization, you need to think about what your security plan is. You need to have that discussion with your solution provider as well. and you need to think about some of the risk management steps that need to come into play when it comes to security as well. AR and augmented reality is something that we see a lot of people kicking the tires on. And again, if this is something where you don't have AR in your organization as of yet, you're not far behind. As you can see, only a handful of companies are actually using it in service. A lot of companies are kicking the tires, evaluating it. And when we say evaluating, actually piloting it and testing it. So it's not just, hey, we saw someone at a conference. It is a transformational technology, but it is one that requires a lot of thought in terms of what are the actual use cases. A lot of people go into thinking about AR saying every technician should have a device that they can use to resolve situations. And there might be a future where that is true. At this point, you need to think about what instance of service visits are the ones that could have benefited from an AR-type solution. And if that number is fairly high, given the number of workers, the youth of the workforce, the training materials that you have, then you're probably a little bit further along around AR. If that number is very low in terms of the actual benefit that would provide of the instances, then you might want to consider AR in more of a training the net new workforce scenario as opposed to every worker now needs to have this new device around AR. So I would just gauge, and I would just suggest applying that lens and filter to understand what current work that's being done, or maybe what work in the next year that's being done would require this sort of assistance before going down and just, embracing the technology and saying, well, we need to be innovative. We definitely see a big role of AR in field service training, at least in the next 12 to 36 months. A lot of this comes back to the aging workforce issue. As you bring in newer workers and you potentially don't train them on everything, you just train them on 80% of the work, but they need assistance for that remaining 20%, whether it's a recorded procedure that they view or a live connection with someone on the back end. We definitely see the aging workforce role play into AR, as well as the complexity of products where, again, as a worker, I'm not trained on all of the things that could go wrong with the machine. I might be trained on most of the things, but then the remaining, 10%, 20%, maybe software fixes, that's something that can be done remotely or with the assistance of AR. And then the final technology is AI, again, transformational. We see very limited usage of it as of now. It's UC 13% currently using AI. Most of those folks are using machine learning in their business to determine either predictive outcomes, proactive support, or better install-based management. Those are the three use cases. In the near term, we expect the AI to get injected more and more so into the contact center, where there's more assistance required from an agent to assist maybe a live agent with saying, here's some of the things that you could be doing and here's some context that you could apply, or potentially with automated assistants to actually assist customers directly. But you can see most companies are thinking about AI and expect that, in the next 5 years that they will be using some form of AI into their business. The goals, again, similar to what we saw over overall investment, productivity, and cost, and customer satisfaction. And this is a little bit of an eye chart, but it talks about all of the different components of AI and the timeline in which companies will invest in those components. And so if I were to take something away from this slide, it's in the near term, companies are investing in things like machine learning to make sense of information and data that they currently have. The next step would be around things like natural language processing and speech recognition to begin to assist customers directly from an engagement point of view, or to begin to assist technicians directly and provide them with assistance. And then we'll get into more cognition or input type systems like computer vision, machine vision. I would suggest that if you do not have an AI strategy, the first thing that you should do is make sure that your executive team is knowledgeable about what AI is and the bigger themes and trends taking place in AI, and then begin to align those with business problems that you have, because there's going to be a lot more noise around AI before there's more clarity. Most people aren't sure whether these solutions are available already. There are some very good solutions in field service and customer support already on the market, but you really have to think about the business problems that you're looking to solve. So I've rambled on for really a long time, but I would say from a recap point of view, the biggest thing that you should consider on mobile workforce empowerment is what is needed to maximize the productivity of the front line. And essentially, if you can ask two questions, what can you do to take away some of the hurdles, and what can you do to enhance the positive part of that workforce's day. Those are the things that you should use as sort of the objectives as you think about your technology roadmap. I'd say measuring field service is not just about efficiency, but think about effectiveness and experience. That should be the way you think about field service performance. And then we really see AR and AI and IoT. We still see them in their early days. I would suggest and think about them not as separate technologies, but think about them as an entire framework. AR could be the input and potentially support. AI is the backend that assists you as a company. IoT is a data feed. And so we don't think about these as separate buckets of investment, but think about how they might all fit together in terms of solving some of the core problems that you have as a business, or you have as a company. So Emily, I think I'll be handing it back to you. I hope everyone found the information to be useful. I know we talked about a lot of themes this year, but it's really about people, process, data, and technology, and putting all of those together to solve your business problems, your employee problems, and your customer problems. And we continue to see more of that, of course, in 2018. Emily, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you, Sumair. We only have a few minutes left, so I just want to make a few points. And first and foremost is, as Sumair mentioned, you're all facing a lot of pressures internally and externally, and then there's this pressure to figure out, well, which of these emerging technologies should we adopt and why, and which ones are actually going to have the real impact, the real ROI that we're looking for. From Astea's viewpoint, our advice is simple. Focus on building the commercial side of your field service operations. Focus on improving the customer experience. And both of those can be accomplished by empowering your frontline mobile workers. I just wanted to call out one of the ways that Astea helps you with building the commercial side of your field service business. You have more pressure on you from management to identify revenue opportunities from your service operations. So why not empower your customers to purchase consumables from you directly? This is a screenshot from our customer portal, which is now mobile, where your customers can go in and purchase these items from you directly. So you're adding revenue at minimal to no cost. We also arm your field technicians through our mobile app, Mobile Edge. They can capture new sales quotations in the field. They can even capture a signature from the client, and that just helps speed up the invoicing process for you. Again, Sumair mentioned 79% of you are focused on improving the field service experience, right? And he also said that the best way to do that is differentiating through the customer experience that you're providing. Just wanted to show you that one of the most requested real-time data points from your customers is being able to envision the technician coming to their site, just like through the Uber app. Again, this is just a screenshot here showing you one of the ways that we can empower you to provide that kind of data that your customers are requesting. Something else is arming your technicians with data into their own objectives, like what's their first-time fix rate, what's their customer satisfaction rate, if their SLAs if they're failing to meet their SLAs, why is that? By empowering them with this information, it gives them a benchmark and it gives them a jumping point to improve. One of the other things that he had mentioned was, being able to shift from reactive to proactive support, and one of the ways you need this to accomplish this is through business intelligence. So this is just an example from some of our business intelligence, is being able to show the technician before they even go on site what are the most recent problem codes, the most frequent repair codes, what are the average parts that are used for this particular asset that you're going out to service, and being able to arm them with this information makes it easier for them to build that kind of rapport with your customer and then eventually build that account as well. If I can leave you with anything, it's similar to what Sumair said, is don't be blinded by all this technology. It's easy to fall into that trap of adopting technology for technology's sake, but really always keep the focus on how will the technology empower your field workers. What you need to do is help them focus on doing the favorite parts of their job and removing the roadblocks that hinder them from being productive and doing their job well. I just want to share with you some screenshots again from our Mobile Edge application. This was redesigned with your field technicians in mind. It's clean, it's simple, it's easy to use. It forces them to go through a flow of steps as they're working through the service order. that is defined how you think it's best for them to do their job. Again, it's just designed for them to be easy to use. Last but not least, one of the things he had mentioned is on their mobile wish list is easy access to knowledge. The faster they can get access to knowledge, the better their rates are going to be for first-time fix rate. So embedded in their mobile app is this knowledge base where they can search based on a product name, and whether it's searching one of your internal knowledge bases or an external on the web, it's all right there at their fingertips. And another thing is, if you don't want to make them search and they're going out to service a particular product, attach the video on how to service that asset right within the service order, or attach the PDF of the training manual so they don't even have to search for it. It's right at their fingertips, and you force them to go through the process of looking at that training asset prior to them servicing it. It'll help them increase their own first-time fix rate, but then, of course, ultimately the customer experience. But let's say that they can't find what they're looking for and you haven't provided it to them. Again, he's talking about augmented reality being something that companies are adopting more. Of course, that's something we offer too. Your techs can launch and help Lightning session right from their mobile app as well. With that, I want to thank you all for attending. Thank you, Sumair, for sharing all of this great data. And Sarah, we will turn it back to you if there's any questions.
Thank you, Emily. We are quickly running out of time, but there was one question here specifically about Sumair's research that I want to make sure we have time to get to. The others we'll have to follow up on after the event. So Sumair, this question says, your research indicates that the best part of a field technician's day is solving customer problems at 74%. Part of this enjoyment may be troubleshooting the issue and the satisfaction of quote-unquote figuring it out. Predictive modeling will minimize the need for troubleshooting. How do technicians view the use of predictive modeling as it impacts their overall job satisfaction?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think a really good point is that part of the work is in finding and solving the problem for the customer, and that involves some of the analysis as well. In our research, we found that for the most part, technicians are actually fairly positive on the impact of things like Internet of Things and sort of the predictive outcomes driven by that. What they tend to be a little bit more attached to is the actual customer. And so what they are happier to give away some of the the steps and tools that they have to go through to get to the problem or the answer to the problem. They have the ability to analyze that beforehand and have a solution or maybe a set of solutions in mind. What they typically like to hold on to a lot more is that relationship that they've built with the customer. And again, if you're going through some of these solutions and you're going to take that relationship away, then that is in my mind, a bigger concept of change management or bigger application of change management than taking away some of the things that they need to do on site every time, because they actually want to make sure that they get it to a solution for the customer. So it is a really good question, and I think for the most part, we haven't seen, we've seen mostly positive perception for that. But the one area where I begin to see a slight negative is in that relationship area with the customer.
Okay, good. So that's some good food for thought. All right, well, unfortunately, we are over on time, so we do have to end here. Like I said, the questions that we weren't able to get to live, we will follow up on after the event. Sumair, Emily, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today. Everyone in the audience, thank you so much for joining. Hope everyone has a great rest of their day.